You know, in all my cycles serving as quartermaster at the Galactic Military Academy, I thought I had seen everything. Every species, every bizarre biological quirk, every ridiculous cultural tradition that the galaxy had to offer. Boy, was I wrong. My name is Quartermaster Moran, and I have been running supplies and logistics for this academy for longer than most cadets have been breathing whatever atmosphere their homeworlds happen to produce. I am a Zeltharian, which means I stand roughly 8 feet tall, have 4 arms that can crush steel, and enough natural armor plating to stop a plasma rifle blast. We Zeltharians pride ourselves on being practical, no-nonsense beings. We do not deal in sentiment or foolish notions. That morning, as I made my rounds through the combat training facility, I was feeling particularly smug about the Academy's reputation. After all, we trained the finest warriors in the galaxy. Our graduates went on to serve in the most elite military units across 17 different star systems. The facility itself was a marvel of engineering, spanning 3 levels with gravitational fields, adjusted for different species, atmospheric controls that could accommodate everything from methane-breathing Krillians to the plasma-based ethereals. The main combat floor buzzed with activity as usual. Towering Brutaxians with their rock-like skin practiced devastating strikes against reinforced training dummies. Sleek Vorthax serpent beings, coiled and struck with lightning speed, their venomous fangs gleaming under the artificial suns. 6-armed mantoid warriors clicked and chittered as they demonstrated complex weapon techniques that would make a seasoned veteran weep with envy. Then there were the humans. Oh, the humans. Where do I even begin with these pathetic little creatures? When the Terran Confederation first applied for membership in our prestigious academy, the entire staff had a good laugh. These beings barely reached my shoulder height, had no natural weapons, no armor plating, no venom, no enhanced strength, no telepathic abilities, nothing. They were pink, squishy, and looked like they would break if you sneezed too hard in their direction. The other cadets found them equally amusing. The massive Gorloks would lumber past the human quarters and snort with derision. The razor-clawed Felixians would make jokes about using humans as scratching posts. Even the normally diplomatic Aquarians would bubble with what could only be described as condescending laughter whenever humans were mentioned in tactical discussions. But Academy regulations were Academy regulations, and if the Galactic Council said we had to accept these fragile little mammals, then so be it. At least they would provide some comic relief for the real warriors during training. That particular morning, I was inspecting the combat mats when I noticed her. Amy Kowalski, according to her file, human female, approximately 5.5 feet tall, maybe 120 pounds soaking wet. She had brown hair tied back in what humans called a ponytail, brown eyes that seemed to take in everything around her, and the kind of build that suggested she might blow away in a stiff breeze. She stood at the edge of the combat area, quietly observing as various alien species warmed up with exercises that would have liquefied a normal being. Her expression was calm, almost serene, which struck me as odd. Most new cadets, especially from less physically gifted species, showed at least some nervousness on their first day of combat training. Amy Kowalski looked like she was waiting for a pleasant afternoon stroll, rather than preparing to train alongside beings who could tear through starship hulls with their bare appendages. The other cadets had not noticed her yet, but when they did, I expected the usual round of mockery and intimidation that seemed to amuse them so much. Little did I know that this unremarkable human female was about to teach every single being in that facility a lesson they would never forget. It did not take long for the other cadets to notice Amy Kowalski standing there like a lost child at a weapons expo. The first to spot her was Brandon Torres, a Saurian from the Kepler system, who stood 7 feet tall and looked like someone had crossed a crocodile with a particularly unpleasant bodybuilder. His scales were a mottled green-brown color that seemed to shift and change in the light, and his teeth, oh those teeth, were designed for tearing through bone and metal with equal enthusiasm. Brandon had made it his personal mission to establish dominance over every other species in the academy, and humans represented what he considered the lowest possible challenge. He swaggered over to where Amy stood, his massive tail leaving scrape marks on the reinforced flooring. Well, 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 Brandon hissed, his forked tongue flicking out to taste the air around the human. What do we have here? Did someone bring their pet to training today? His comment drew the attention of his usual crew of admirers. There was Gorvak, a Brutaxian, whose rocky hide looked like it had been carved from a particularly aggressive mountain. Standing next to him was Thessia, a mantoid whose 6 arms clicked and flexed in what passed for amusement among her kind. The group was rounded out by Vex, a Felixian, who had retractable claws longer than most species' primary weapons. Commander Tom Mali, our head combat instructor, watched this display from his elevated platform, with what I can only describe as resigned irritation. Tom was a Corvan, which meant he had natural psychic abilities, and could sense the emotional undercurrents flowing through the room like toxic rivers. His blue-tinted skin and large multifaceted eyes gave him an almost insect-like appearance, but his tactical mind was sharper than a plasma blade. "Torres," Commander Mali called out, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made even the most arrogant cadets pay attention. "Perhaps you would like to focus on your own training, rather than harassing fellow Academy members." But Brandon was clearly in the mood for entertainment. He circled around Amy like a predator sizing up prey, his claws scraping against the floor with each step. "Look at this tiny thing, Commander. Are we supposed to pretend this fragile little creature belongs in the same training facility as real warriors?" The other cadets began to gather around, sensing the possibility of a spectacle. I watched from my position near the equipment lockers, as more species joined the crowd. The Aquarians floated in their mobility tanks, their tentacles writhing with anticipation. A group of ethereals flickered in and out of visible spectrum, their plasma-based forms pulsing with what might have been excitement or hunger. "I mean seriously," Brandon continued, his voice getting louder and more theatrical. "My grandmother could probably take this human in single combat, and she has been dead for 30 solar cycles." Gorvak rumbled with laughter, a sound like boulders grinding together in an earthquake. "Maybe we should put a warning label on the training equipment. Caution, may cause severe injury or death to humans." Thessia's mandibles clicked rapidly in her species version of giggling. "Perhaps we should set up a separate area for them, with softer surfaces and smaller weights. We would not want them to hurt themselves trying to lift something heavy, like a feather." Through all of this mockery, Amy Kowalski remained perfectly still and calm. She had not said a single word, had not shown even the slightest sign of fear or anger. Her brown eyes moved from speaker to speaker with the kind of detached interest you might show while watching mildly entertaining theater. This calm reaction seemed to irritate Brandon even more. Saurians were used to intimidating their opponents, and when intimidation failed, they tended to escalate their tactics. "Are you even listening to me, little mammal?" Brandon snarled, stepping closer until he loomed directly over Amy. His breath, which smelled like rotting fish and sulfur, washed over her face. "Or are you too primitive to understand what we are saying?" Amy looked up at him with those same calm brown eyes and spoke her first words of the day. Her voice was steady, pleasant, and carried just a hint of amusement. "I understand perfectly," she said. "Please continue. This is quite educational." That response sent a ripple of confused murmurs through the crowd of alien cadets. They had expected crying, begging, or at least some visible sign of distress. Instead, they got polite interest. Before Brandon could escalate his harassment any further, the distinctive sound of Admiral Vashi's approach echoed through the training facility. The Admiral was an Exarian, which meant she moved with the fluid grace of someone who had evolved in zero-gravity environments. Her silver skin reflected the training facility lights like liquid mercury, and her 4 eyes could track multiple targets simultaneously. When Admiral Vashi entered a room, everyone knew it. "Attention, cadets." Her voice rang out with crystal clarity. The chatter and posturing stopped immediately. Even Brandon Torres straightened up and tried to look professional, though his expression suggested he had been caught stealing from the mess hall. "Today we will be conducting hand-to-hand combat evaluations," Admiral Vashi continued, floating effortlessly to the center of the training area. "Each species will demonstrate their natural combat abilities before we begin sparring exercises. This is not a competition, but rather an assessment of baseline capabilities." She gestured toward a series of reinforced combat circles that had been marked out on the floor. "The rules are simple: no weapons, no enhancement technology, no psychic abilities that could cause permanent damage. We are here to learn, not to fill the medical bay." Commander Tom Mali stepped forward, his psychic abilities already reading the emotional states of the assembled cadets. "We will begin with demonstrations from each species group. Brutaxians, you are first." Gorvak lumbered forward with obvious pride, his rocky exterior gleaming under the lights. He approached one of the reinforced training dummies, a device designed to withstand assault from most known species in the galaxy. With a casual backhand strike, Gorvak shattered the dummy into several large pieces. The sound was like a small avalanche. "Impressive as always," Admiral Vashi noted, making marks on her digital tablet. "Mantoids, you are next." Thessia scuttled forward on her 6 legs, her movements quick and precise. She struck the replacement dummy with a complex series of attacks, her multiple arms working in perfect coordination. Within seconds the dummy looked like it had been fed through an industrial shredder. The demonstrations continued. The Saurians showed off their crushing bite force and razor-sharp claws. The Reflexes displayed their lightning-fast reflexes and retractable talons. The Aquarians used their tentacles to demonstrate grappling techniques that could immobilize opponents in seconds. Each species performed with obvious pride, showing off millions of years of evolutionary advantages. Throughout all of this, I noticed that Amy Kowalski remained at the edge of the group, still maintaining that same calm, observant demeanor. She watched each demonstration with the kind of focused attention you might expect from a tactical analyst, not a supposedly inferior being about to be humiliated. Finally, Admiral Vashi turned toward the small group of human cadets. There were only 3 of them in the entire academy, and Amy was the only one present for this particular training session. Humans, Admiral Vashi announced, consulting her tablet again. According to your species profile, you have no natural weapons, no enhanced strength, no armor plating, and no specialized combat adaptations. Is this assessment accurate? Amy stepped forward with that same serene confidence. That assessment is technically correct, Admiral. Brandon Torres could not contain himself any longer. He let out a sound that was part laugh, part hiss. This should be entertaining. What is she going to do? Bore the dummy to death. More laughter rippled through the assembled cadets. Even some of the more diplomatic species seemed amused by the situation. Here was a being with no apparent combat advantages, about to demonstrate her capabilities alongside creatures who had evolved specifically for warfare. Admiral Vashi raised one of her hands for silence. Nevertheless, regulations require a demonstration from all species. Please proceed, Cadet Kowalski. Amy walked toward the training dummy, with the same unhurried pace she had maintained all morning. She did not crack her knuckles, did not stretch, did not engage in any of the typical pre-combat rituals that other species use to psyche themselves up. She simply stood in front of the dummy, and waited. The entire training facility fell silent, waiting to see what this fragile little human could possibly do that would not result in her immediate medical evacuation. What happened next will be burned into my memory, until the day I return my atoms to the cosmic void. Amy Kowalski stood there for perhaps 3 seconds, studying the training dummy with the kind of clinical detachment that should have been our first warning sign. Then, without any visible preparation or dramatic build-up, she struck. Her fist moved faster than most of the assembled cadets could track. The reinforced training dummy, designed to withstand assault from beings 3 times her size and 10 times her apparent strength, exploded. Not cracked, not dented, not damaged. Exploded. Into tiny fragments that scattered across the training floor like metallic confetti. The silence that followed was the kind of profound quiet you normally only hear in the vacuum of space. Every single being in that facility was staring at the small human female who had just turned military-grade equipment into expensive debris with what appeared to be a casual punch. Brandon Torres, however, was not the kind of individual who learned lessons from subtle demonstrations. His tiny saurian brain apparently interpreted what had just happened as some kind of fluke, possibly involving hidden technology or academy trickery designed to make the humans look less pathetic than they actually were. Parlor tricks, he hissed loudly, his voice echoing in the still silent facility. Anyone can destroy a dummy if the academy rigs it to break apart. Let us see how tough you are against a real opponent. Admiral Vashi raised one of her hands, clearly intending to maintain order and prevent an unauthorized combat situation. But Brandon Torres had already made his decision. He lunged toward Amy with the kind of arrogant confidence that comes from being an apex predator on a death world for the first 20 years of your life. His plan, if you could call something so stupid a plan, was apparently to grab Amy by her ponytail and use her own hair to swing her around like some kind of organic flail. In Saurian culture, controlling an opponent's head movement was considered the ultimate display of dominance. It was also, as we were about to learn, an extremely poor decision when dealing with humans. Brandon's clawed hand shot out toward Amy's brown ponytail, moving with the speed and precision that had made Saurians feared throughout their home system. His fingers were already closing around the strands of hair when Amy moved. I have to pause here and explain something about what I witnessed, because even now, cycles later, I am not entirely sure I believe what my own eyes recorded. Humans, as it turns out, have something called a startle reflex. When threatened suddenly, their nervous system bypasses conscious thought and triggers what can only be described as controlled violence. Amy Kowalski spun around faster than physics should have allowed. Her elbow, that harmless-looking joint in the middle of her arm, caught Brandon Torres directly in the wrist with the force of a plasma cannon blast. The sound was like a tree branch snapping, except much, much louder. Brandon's hand, still clutching a few strands of Amy's hair, separated from his wrist and flew across the training facility in a graceful arc before landing with a wet thud near the equipment lockers. For a moment, Brandon just stood there, staring at the ragged stump where his hand used to be. His reptilian brain seemed to be having trouble processing the fact that a significant portion of his anatomy had just been removed by something that weighed less than his breakfast. Then the pain hit him. The sound that came out of Brandon Torres was unlike anything I had heard in my long career at the academy. It was part scream, part hiss, part roar, and entirely pathetic. He collapsed to his knees, clutching his severed wrist while green saurian blood pooled on the training floor. The training facility erupted into absolute mayhem. Cadets from a dozen different species scattered in all directions, some seeking cover, others trying to get a better view of the carnage. The Aquarians in their mobility tanks began spinning in frantic circles. The ethereals flickered in and out of visibility, so rapidly they looked like malfunctioning holographic projectors. Commander Tom Molley was shouting orders that nobody could hear over the chaos. Medical team to combat Facility 1. Emergency protocols activated. All cadets maintain your positions. Admiral Vashi was already activating her emergency communicator, her 4 eyes tracking multiple crisis situations simultaneously. This is Admiral Vashi. We have a Class 4 medical emergency in the main training facility. Require immediate surgical intervention for limb reattachment. And through all of this chaos, Amy Kowalski stood exactly where she had been before, looking down at Brandon Torres with an expression of mild concern. She seemed genuinely surprised by the severity of his injury, like someone who had swatted at a fly and accidentally brought down a transport shuttle. "Oh," she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the screaming and confusion. "I did not mean for that to happen. Should I have pulled that strike?" The medical team arrived within minutes, though it felt like hours, as we all stood around watching Brandon Torres writhe on the floor in a growing pool of his own blood. The medics, an efficient crew of Corvin specialists, immediately began working to stabilize him for surgery. One of them managed to retrieve his severed hand from where it had landed near my equipment lockers, though whether it could be successfully reattached remained an open question. As the medical emergency unfolded, Judge Quintara arrived on the scene. Now, Judge Quintara was not actually a legal official, despite her title. She was the Academy's chief xenobiologist, a Vorthak serpent being whose scientific credentials were so extensive that most species simply called her judge out of respect for her knowledge. Her scales shifted from deep blue to concerned purple as she slithered into the training facility and assessed the situation. "What exactly happened here?" Judge Quintara asked, her forked tongue flicking out to analyze the chemical composition of the chaos around her. Her multiple eyes focused on the blood, the scattered debris from the destroyed dummy, and finally on Amy Kowalski, who was still standing in the same spot looking mildly confused by all the fuss. Admiral Vashi quickly briefed Judge Quintara on the events, though her explanation sounded absurd even as she spoke it. The human female struck a training dummy and destroyed it completely. When Cadet Torres attempted to grab her hair from behind, she reflexively defended herself and severed his hand at the wrist. Judge Quintara's scales shifted to a deep amber color, which in Vorthak physiology indicated intense intellectual curiosity mixed with growing alarm. She slithered closer to Amy, studying her with the kind of scientific fascination usually reserved for newly discovered supernovas. "Fascinating," Judge Quintara murmured, though her tone suggested she found it more terrifying than fascinating. "Commander Molley, have you reviewed the human homeworld environmental data?" Commander Tom Molley, still dealing with the psychic chaos radiating from every frightened cadet in the facility, shook his head. The basic overview indicated a standard Class M planet with typical evolutionary pressures. "Nothing remarkable. Nothing remarkable," Judge Quintara repeated, her voice rising to what could only be described as academic hysteria. "Nothing remarkable. Commander Earth is classified as a Class 12 death world. The only reason it is not classified higher is because the scale only goes to 15, and those planets are considered completely uninhabitable." The remaining cadets who had been trying to process what they had witnessed suddenly became very interested in Judge Quintara's explanation. Even the medical team paused in their work to listen. "Let me explain what nothing remarkable actually means," Judge Quintara continued, her scales now shifting through colors I had never seen before. "Earth has an atmospheric composition that is literally poisonous to most galactic species. 21% oxygen creates an environment so corrosive that most metals oxidize rapidly when exposed to it. Gorvak, The Brutaxian, who had been so confident in his rocky hide, made a sound like grinding gravel. That cannot be accurate. How do they survive in such conditions? They evolved in those conditions, Judge Quintara explained. Their entire physiology is adapted to function in what we would consider a toxic environment. But that is just the beginning. Earth experiences regular seismic activity, extreme weather patterns, and gravitational forces that would crush most of us. She gestured toward Amy, who was listening to this explanation with polite interest. The gravity on Earth is approximately twice what we maintain here at the Academy. Every single day of their existence, humans are essentially performing strength training that would challenge our finest athletes. Thesia, the mantoid, clicked her mandibles nervously. But they look so fragile. How is this possible? Convergent evolution toward efficiency, Judge Quintara replied. They do not waste energy on external armor or obvious weapons because they do not need them. Their bones are denser than most species' natural armor. Their muscle fibers can generate force levels that exceed their body weight by factors we previously thought impossible for organic tissue. The judge slithered closer to where Brandon's blood was still being cleaned up. But the most remarkable aspect is their nervous system response to threats. What we just witnessed was not a conscious attack. It was an automatic defensive reflex hardwired into their biology. Admiral Vashi's 4 eyes were now all focused on Amy with what I can only describe as professional respect mixed with deep concern. Are you saying that was an involuntary response? Precisely, Judge Quintara confirmed. When humans detect sudden movement toward vital areas like their head or neck, their nervous system triggers what they call a startle reflex. It bypasses conscious thought entirely and activates motor responses designed to neutralize threats with maximum efficiency and minimum delay. Amy finally spoke up, sounding almost apologetic. I really did not mean to hurt him so badly. On Earth, that would have been considered a fairly light defensive strike. I was actually trying to be gentle since I knew he was not used to our gravity levels. The silence that followed this statement was profound. Every alien in that facility was suddenly reconsidering everything they thought they knew about humans. The realization was slowly dawning on all of us that we had not been dealing with a weak species that needed protection and accommodation. We had been sharing training facilities with apex predators from a death world, and we had been too arrogant to realize it. Gorvak was the first to voice what we were all thinking. If that was a light strike, what would a serious attack look like? Amy considered this question with the same calm thoughtfulness she had shown all morning. Well, if someone was actually trying to hurt me or my friends, I suppose I would not hold back at all. The medical team chose that moment to finally load Brandon Torres onto a transport stretcher. As they carried him away, still unconscious from the pain medication, I could not help but notice that every single alien cadet stepped aside to give Amy Kowalski a very wide berth. Within hours of the incident, word had spread throughout the entire academy like wildfire through a hydrogen processing plant. By the time the evening meal was served, every cadet instructor and staff member knew exactly what had happened in Combat Training Facility 1. The story grew more dramatic with each telling, but the core facts remained disturbingly consistent. A human had casually destroyed a training dummy, then removed a Saurian's hand with what she considered a restrained defensive response. Brandon Torres spent the next 3 days in the medical bay undergoing reconstructive surgery. The Corvin medical team managed to reattach his hand, though they warned him that he would never regain full function in his fingers. The irony was not lost on anyone that a being who had mocked humans for their supposed weakness would now require permanent accommodation for his reduced physical capabilities. Admiral Drahorn, the Academy's commanding officer, arrived from headquarters to conduct a formal investigation. Drahorn was an Exarian like Admiral Vashi, but older and considerably more intimidating. His silver skin had taken on the darker patina that came with age and experience, and his 4 eyes had the kind of cold intelligence that made even senior officers nervous. The investigation took less than an hour. The facility's recording systems had captured everything in perfect detail, from Brandon's initial harassment to Amy's reflexive response. Admiral Drahorn reviewed the footage 3 times, consulted with Judge Quintara about human physiology, and then delivered his official ruling. No disciplinary action will be taken against Cadet Kowalski, Admiral Drahorn announced to the assembled Academy staff. The review clearly shows that Cadet Torres initiated unauthorized physical contact during a training exercise, and Cadet Kowalski responded with appropriate defensive measures according to her species biology. He paused, his 4 eyes scanning the room with obvious displeasure. However, this incident has revealed serious gaps in our xenobiological education program. Effective immediately, All Academy personnel will be required to complete comprehensive courses on the physiological capabilities and limitations of every species enrolled in our programs. The impact on Academy culture was immediate and profound. The casual mockery that had characterized alien interactions with humans disappeared overnight. In the mess hall, other cadets would carefully move aside when Amy approached, not out of fear exactly, but out of a newfound respect for what she represented. Gorvac, whose rocky hide had seemed so impressive just days earlier, now approached Amy with the kind of deference usually reserved for explosive ordnance. "Cadet Kowalski," he rumbled during one meal period, "would it be possible for you to provide instruction on human defensive techniques? I believe we could all benefit from understanding your capabilities." Even more remarkable was the change in Thessia's attitude. The mantoid, who had previously made jokes about human fragility, now sought Amy out for tactical discussions. "Your species' ability to function under such high gravitational stress," Thessia clicked enthusiastically. "It must provide significant advantages in zero-gravity combat situations." Amy handled her new status with the same calm grace she had shown throughout the entire incident. She never gloated, never reminded anyone of their previous attitudes, and certainly never threatened anyone with demonstrations of human capabilities. If anything, she seemed slightly embarrassed by all the attention. "I really am not trying to be intimidating," she explained to a group of cadets who had asked about Earth's environmental conditions. "Most humans are much more physically capable than I am. I spend most of my time in academic research, not combat training." This revelation sent another wave of nervous energy through the Academy population. If Amy Kowalski, a self-described academic researcher, could casually remove limbs, what were human military specialists capable of? The answer to that question would remain theoretical, at least for the time being. But the mere possibility had fundamentally changed how every species at the Academy viewed their human colleagues. The 3 human cadets at the Academy went from being objects of amusement to beings who commanded genuine respect and careful consideration. As I made my rounds through the facility in the days following the incident, I could not help but notice the subtle changes in behavior. Cadets who had previously pushed and shoved their way through corridors now moved with more awareness of personal space. Training sessions became more focused and less prone to the kind of casual aggression that had characterized interspecies interactions. The humans, for their part, seemed genuinely puzzled by all the fuss. They continued their studies and training with the same quiet determination they had always shown, apparently unaware that they had fundamentally altered the social dynamics of the entire institution. As I finish writing this report, several months have passed since what Academy personnel now refer to as the hair incident. The changes implemented in response to that day have become permanent fixtures of Academy life, and I suspect they will remain so for generations to come. The most significant policy change involves something we now call the Human Protocol. Any training exercise involving human cadets must be supervised by staff members who have completed the Advanced Xenobiology Certification Program. More importantly, all physical contact between humans and other species during training requires explicit consent from both parties and medical supervision. We have also installed what Admiral Drehorn diplomatically terms environmental adjustment chambers but which everyone else calls human strength dampening fields. These devices reduce gravitational force in designated training areas, theoretically allowing humans to operate at strength levels closer to their non-Deathworlder colleagues. The humans find this amusing but comply with the regulations. Brandon Torres eventually returned to training, though his attitude underwent a remarkable transformation. The arrogant bully who had once terrorized smaller cadets now speaks in respectful whispers around humans and has developed an almost obsessive interest in Earth's environmental conditions. He has requested transfer to the diplomatic corps, citing a desire to better understand interspecies cooperation. As for Amy Kowalski, she graduated at the top of her class and now serves as a cultural liaison officer. Her job involves helping newly contacted species understand human capabilities before those species make the same mistakes we did. According to reports from the field, her presentations are extremely effective, largely because she demonstrates human reflexes on volunteers who foolishly think they can handle it. The lesson here, if there is one, is simple: never, under any circumstances, grab a Deathworlder by the hair. Or really, never grab a Deathworlder by anything, unless you enjoy medical procedures involving limb reattachment. We Zeltharians pride ourselves on being practical, no-nonsense beings who learn from experience. Well, we certainly learned something that day. We learned that the galaxy is full of species we do not understand, and that assuming weakness based on appearance is a mistake that can cost you appendages. But most importantly, we learned that humans, those soft pink seemingly fragile creatures, are absolutely terrifying when you surprise them. And frankly, that is a lesson I am perfectly happy to have learned secondhand.